So, first up, let's talk about A Real Pain, which I have to say, it's dangerous to title your film A Real Pain if it then turns out to be a right pain to sit through. Fortunately, I thought this was really, really excellent. It's starring and directed by Jesse Eisenberg, and it tells the story of two cousins with a slightly odd, slightly strange relationship who essentially reconnect on this big trip back to Poland. They're American, but they are Jewish and they want to kind of re engage with their ancestry, particularly their grandmother who fled Poland in World War II. And the film, I think, is really interesting because it's this kind of balance of comedy, of drama. At times, it's very serious, but it kind of does it in a light fingered way. What did you think about this film? Were you on board with A Real Pain, or did it feel like suffering to you?
There's no mystery that there's no secret that I was never a huge Jesse Eisenberg fan. However, this film was very, very, very interesting, and I must say I loved it. Loved it with a capital Love. I thought the dedication to character alone in this film, not just the two leads who are expertly portrayed, perfectly cast. I must admit, I know Jesse Eisenberg directed and wrote the film, and also starring, you think, oh, egomaniacal, it has that tendency to going too far, but the character suits him to a T. And Kieran Culkin is masterful. The film's called A Real Pain, and that character is sort of presented as being very emotional. He has a lot of mood swings, and he seems very difficult. He is the real pain of the title, the titular Real Pain. However, I was so engaged with the character. The character almost has this hypnotic impression on people, on the other characters. He is able to be this very difficult person, but also enrich the lives of the people he surrounds. And I was enriched by his character, I thought. I thought it was a very interesting demonstration of both post-depression, sort of recovery, but also just the beginnings of that, because all the characters experience a lot of trauma. The film goes through Jewish history in Poland, and a large aspect of it is the Holocaust. But I didn't feel like this film was exploitative at all. I thought it was a very gentle look at such a devastating history. And I know Jesse Eisenberg is Jewish himself, so it was a really interesting meditation on the separation of American characters who grow up Jewish or have Jewish ancestry and are going back to look at history that they're so removed from. And there's a lot of dialogue throughout and a lot of talk throughout the film of that emotion itself, the separation, and how people react to that, how the sort of most the American tourists react. I just thought, what an interesting idea. And it's beautifully shot. It's not too flashy. It's wonderfully performed by everyone. Jennifer Grey is in the film, and she does a beautifully nuanced, small performance, but beautiful. It works. Every performance works in this film. The scoring is excellent. It's a very unique way of scoring it. It just works so wonderfully with the story. It uses a lot of Chopin, which is just beautiful, just his own history, and it enriches it. It's really clever. Everything's thought out, but it doesn't feel too meticulous when you watch it, so you're not bombarded with too much information. It just feels like you can really engage with the experience that all the characters are having. Genuinely, I was so impressed by the film. Really, really impressed. I really haven't seen Kieran Culkin. I haven't watched Succession. I know people might shoot me down for that, but obviously I've seen Kieran Culkin as a very young child in the Home Alone films, and I know a lot. I've seen his brother in a lot of films. I would really hope he gets recognition for it. I hope he gets a really good commendation or anything, because it is such an interesting performance. He's supposed to be annoying, but I would see how I could connect to him as a friend and how I could see his pain, but also Jesse Eisenberg's performance as the person who is tormented by their family member and sort of not feeling good enough, but feeling better at the same time, like feeling so much more advanced emotionally and financially, and yet still in the shadow of someone who seems not to have their life together. I think any family, any human who has a relationship with their family can experience those things. It really is so perfectly done. I had no problems with this film, but I came out beaming. I was genuinely like, this film made me want to be a better writer. I think a lot of films want me to be a better filmmaker in the way that they're crafted, but this one, I thought the writing was excellent. I genuinely thought this was one of the best films I've seen on the roster of Cinema Spotlight. So I'll stop wobbling on, Reuben, because I'd love to know your opinion, because I don't think maybe you're not as emphatic as me, but I'd love to know what you thought.
Yeah, no. So I'm not as emphatic about it as you, but I sort of don't know why. I mean, I agree with everything you said. I do think it's a really good exploration, really, of kind of pain in relation to identity in many ways. There's a brilliant sequence where they are sat in a restaurant, and there is a kind of a sort of explosive moment of tension that then sort of resolves into a much more kind of a reflective look at how we all are shaped by the pain in our lives. And that might be generational pain, that might be physical pain, that might be mental illness. But the film is really, really interested in pain in all of its forms and how they inform our character. And I think that Jesse Eisenberg is the perfect person to kind of play out a lot of that internal struggle, because I think he's really, really fantastic at actually doing quite a lot with a fairly minimal performance. And I really believed in his relationship with Kieran Culkin's character. I did find that character at times a nightmare. I was sat there watching the film being like, oh my goodness, this is awful, this is awful, how embarrassing for Jesse Eisenberg's character. But at the same time, you're sat there going, I recognise that behaviour, because I know people who are like that, and I know times that I have been like that. And it speaks so much to the nature of being a person and existing in the world, which is that it is hard. And there is a brilliant phrase that Jesse Eisenberg says in the restaurant scene that I referred to, where he talks about the fact that Kieran Culkin's character has issues that he's kind of battling with, but he himself, Jesse Eisenberg's character, also has difficulties. You know, he says, I understand that my pain is not exceptional. And I just think, therefore, that the film becomes this really kind of interesting exploration of how we exist in relation to our pain and how it affects then our lives, and the way that that ties into the historical trauma, the generational trauma of the Holocaust. You know, these are Jewish American men who are going back to Poland to reconnect with their ancestors and reconnect with their heritage. But with that comes pain, and with that comes suffering, both in the past and in the present. And you know, you talked about Chopin, and I actually think Chopin is the key to this and ties it all together. Whenever I think about Chopin, I think about, you know, the sort of the mournfulness of the raindrop, you know, melody and things like that, where it's an immediate sort of emotional crystallization of all of these feelings into one piece of music. And I think the film functions in a very similar way. It is a kind of crystallization of a lot of, in many ways, very interlinked and complex ideas of pain and trauma. And obviously, it's in the title, A Real Pain, but I think that it wears that trauma actually impressively lightly. The sequences where they visit a former concentration camp are rightfully heavy, but the film at no point feels weighed down by the kind of the importance of the issues that it's tackling. And it just becomes this kind of, I felt, this kind of wave of emotion that encapsulates a lot of issues and a lot of important themes, but does so in a way that allows it to retain its lightness, allows it to retain its comedy, and crucially allows you to remain completely emotionally connected with its characters. So I was also a really big fan. I think that because it is in many ways quite low key, it slips under the radar a little bit. I don't really think this is going to be much of a contender in awards. I think it was nominated for one BAFTA, but I think broadly that's perhaps just because the film itself it's a little bit restrained. You know, it's not interested in being showy because it takes what it's doing seriously, and that confusingly involves taking it lightly.
Yes, I sort of agree on the sense of how low key it is. Obviously, it deals with the brevity of the Holocaust really well, in a really interesting way. There's moments in the film where the tour guide is called out for just how statistical and how detached it becomes. And I found the film as a whole quite palate cleansing, as a sense of that it doesn't have a pomposity about it. Internally, it's very human. It's probably the most interesting human film I've seen in the Cinema Spotlight roster that we've had. I thought, as you're right, they're very realistic. Like Jesse Eisenberg's character, as you said, that great moment where he talks about my pain is not exceptional, but I have to deal with it in my own way. Okay, Kieran Culkin's character does not deal with his pain as nuanced and as politely. But I really connected with that. I connected that he was, even though slightly contradictory in places, he was trying to evoke something, a feeling in characters that were so detached from it, to try and connect to that generational trauma, but not by reliving the events, but by having people just feel, really connect with something, not be this sort of the opposite of Jesse Eisenberg, not be closed off, not trap themselves in this idea of the freeness to not only cry, but also to have a bit of fun as well, like to joke around the moments where it's seen in the trailer, they recreate the a big statue, a big art piece. They all just sort of become mimes or become statues themselves in a very fun moment, but it sort of frees up the group. It gets the energies flowing a bit, and then when it comes to the Holocaust, just the flowing of them, the scene where they go to the concentration camp, the emotions flow much better, and then the two characters sort of connect a bit more and start communicating. That's a big problem that a lot of the human race has, is that communication is just impossible. And this film deals with it in such an interesting way. It provokes a positive sense. And I felt very hopeful after this film. And it ends slightly ambiguously, I won't spoil, about where the characters are, how far they've come. But I do feel that even, the through line is people do get better throughout this film. The real pain is not the character of Benji himself, but the pain they experience and how they deal with it, and how to really become better humans, to
Yes.
actually connect. And I thought, well, that's so wonderful. We don't give star ratings on this, but it would be the brightest of star ratings. I can tell you that. But genuinely, I would highly, highly recommend it, because it is heavy, of course it is. But as I said, it uplifts you. It doesn't leave you with a great sense of dread. It leaves you with a sense of respect for the pain that maybe a culture that you are not a part of has dealt with. But
Yeah.
because it is so personal to the internal of the characters, you can see yourself in any one of the characters. What a great piece of art.
I think that the fact that it uses also the imagery of kind of waiting rooms at airports too, and this is no spoiler to kind of bookend the piece, is also kind of speaks to the themes that you're referencing there. In that it has this sense of liminality. Those are zones of change. When you go to an airport, you are basically sort of in a purgatorial in between where you're not at home, but you're not at your destination yet. You are on a journey. And in so many ways, I think the film functions, as a giant metaphor of that. We are all on a journey. And actually, perhaps slightly differently to you, I didn't feel that it kind of ended with a conclusion of that journey. I think it ends, and this is what I liked about it, with a kind of sense of, okay, we've moved along, we've traveled, we've gone somewhere, but the journey isn't over. All of the pain hasn't been expunged, because that's not what life is about. Life is about living with pain, and understanding it and almost making peace with it. And I felt that that was really well expressed in the film's kind of closing moments, where you just have this sense of, okay, we are all on this journey of life together. And it's okay for things never to be completely tied up with a bow, because that just isn't what life and pain and being a human being fundamentally is about. But yes, I really enjoyed it. I think for me, it's like it's a 4-star film. But I'm so glad that you loved it so much, and I definitely want to revisit it, because, as you say, the performances are fantastic, and the script in particular is really very inspiring. So yes, A Real Pain is a definite thumbs up from me.
5 stars from me.